Welcome back. This week in pro football, Pat Callahan joining you here, week one, the National Football League on JAKIB Sports. And always pleased to welcome this gentleman back, especially to open up the season. And that would be the Hall of Famer himself, a veteran of the Bulletin. Used to serve the Bulletin down at Franklin Field when the Eagles were playing there. Philadelphia Daily News, NBC Sports Philadelphia, and WIP. That's Ray Didinger. Ray, how are you?
Fine, Pat. How are you doing?
All right, it's great to see you again, Ray. I hope you enjoyed your summer. And we're back now again, the autumn and the thinking John Facenda here as we get ready for the 103rd season of the NFL. And you and I have seen far too many of the first 102, Ray. I'll say that much.
That's right? For sure. That's for sure. I mean, you took me back when you started talking about Franklin Field. When I first started covering the Eagles, my first year covering them for the Bulletin was 1970, and that was the last year at Franklin Field. And then so I covered them the last year at Franklin Field, and then the first year at the Vet, and then all the way through the Vet, and now into the Link. So I've seen a lot of Eagles football. Some of it not so great, but some of it pretty good.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, let's talk about that now for 2024, right? The Eagles obviously coming off a terrible finish, 1-6 to finish up the season. And their ninth home game of the year is 4,700 miles away, Ray, in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So let me just start with that. Is there anybody in the Eagles organization besides the owner and 31 other owners, and of course Roger Goodell, who's happy to be flying 4,700 miles to open their season?
Yeah, flying 4,700 miles to play a home game. Just try and explain the logic of that to me. Pat, I think you and I are the same mind on this stuff. I mean, I really don't get this whole international thing. I really don't. I know it's coming down from the top. The powers that be on Park Avenue have decided that this is something that they really want to do. They want to make the NFL a global game, and so they're going to make all the coaches and players play these games. And I know I've been around football long enough, as have you. You know how coaches' minds work, and you know how players are routine oriented. So telling them that, oh, by the way, the opener is going to be in Sao Paulo, Brazil. The coaches what are they going to do? They got to go along with it. So they have no say in it. Yeah. But I mean, they all are grinding their teeth and saying, what the heck are we doing this for? So the only thing you hope for is that you get down there, you play the game, hopefully you get a W, and then you fly back and then, put it in the rearview mirror. But for now, this is not the way any sensible NFL franchise wants to start a season.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's funny. The NFLPA is talking about that Players Association. They rattle a lot of sabers. But the fact is, Ray, we already have a 17th game. There's no question in my mind we're going to an 18th game.
Sure.
These international games appear here to stay. I wonder sometimes what the NFLPA does for a living. The only thing I guess they seem to want is just keep giving us an increasing share of that money pie, and we'll put up with everything else.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the way it looks. I mean, they've got, the salary cap keeps going up. The players get more money. And ultimately, that's what they want. I remember going back a ways now when I was still at the newspaper and covering back in the days when you actually had NFL strikes, when you actually had players, the season stopped because the players went on strike. Yeah. And Gene Upshaw was the head of the NFLPA. And I had a pretty good relationship with Gene going back to his days as a player. And we had a lot of conversations about what is the union fighting for here? What are you trying to accomplish? And and I always said to Gene, I said, what you should be fighting for are things like healthcare and better pensions and guys having, if you're a vested player, if you get your 5 years in, that you have health insurance for the rest of your life. so that when your knees are replaced and your hips are replaced, that the league's paying for it.
Yeah.
I mean, trying to fight to get artificial turf out of the game. I mean, all of these issues that are really critical to a player's career and his life post-career. Well, that's the thing that unions are supposed to be fighting for.
Right.
But they're not. It's the first thing that would come off the negotiating table.
Yeah, exactly.
And what Gene said to me was, he said, look, I know I agree with everything you're saying here, but you got to understand, I bring it to the players and the players just say, I want the money.
There you go.
I want money like right now.
Right.
And I understand that they're 22, 23, 24-year-old guys. They're not long-term thinkers.
Right.
But somebody really should have sat them down and explained, look, fellas, when you're 40, 50, I know you don't want to think about it, but when you're 40, 50 years old, this is the stuff that's going to be important to you. A pension, health care. Well, they didn't want to hear that. Just get the money on the table right now. And as a result, the union and Upshaw, who was doing most of the negotiating with Paul Tagley, we kind of felt like his hands were tied.
4 or 5 years ago, I did a tour of Lincoln Financial with a bank that I did business with, which at that time was the official bank sponsor of the Philadelphia Eagles. And a bank representative there told me that the league had a 401k plan that had a 300% match. And not one Eagle was enrolled in the plan. Not one. So that just speaks to exactly what you were talking about. But enough of that. Let me ask you this now. I'm interested in the fact, Ray, that the Eagles have 2 new coordinators this year. Kellen Moore on the offense and Vic Fangio on the defense. Tell me how different you think they're going to be. And I'm curious in your take with Fangio and how you see his relationship developing with Nick Sirianni.
Well, I've known Vic since the days of the Philadelphia Stars, when the Philadelphia Stars and the USFL were born, and the franchise came to Philadelphia, and Jim Mora was hired to be the coach. Yeah. He put together a really good staff, and one of his best hires was Vic Fangio, who he brought in, never coached at any level of professional football, and brought him in and made him the linebacker coach and ultimately the DC. And I was very impressed with the way they played. I mean, the Philadelphia Stars in the mid-'80s, when they were playing, and they were only around for 3 years, were actually, I felt, a more professionally run organization than what the Eagles were at that time. I mean, they didn't have the best players, but they were really well coached, really well prepared, and it reflected. I mean, they played the championship game every year that league was on the field. Right. And, Vic was a real big contributor to that, to the point where when the league folded and Jim Mora was hired to go to the Saints as the head coach, he brought Vic with him. And then that just started Vic along his path in the NFL. And he's been in the league pretty much ever since, moving from team to team. But everywhere he goes, his teams generally play well and his defenses play well. Yeah. And I think bringing him here was really smart. And I think it's going to produce good results. Now, it ultimately always comes down to your players, and we'll see how good his players are. I think that if anybody watched them at the end of last year, their defensive secondary, honestly, for the last 4 or 5 weeks, there was no defense and no secondary in the NFL that played worse than the Eagles down the stretch. Their secondary play, and I watch a lot of film, you can name any team in the league. Nobody was playing worse pass defense than the Eagles were. And they were totally out of sync at the line of scrimmage. The linebackers and the defensive line looked like they were playing 2 different systems. So you had everything at the front 7 was messed up because nobody was playing together. And then in the secondary, you were playing with a lot of guys who just couldn't cover. And that was pretty awful. Now, you've made some changes. You got some new people, and it's up to Vic now to put those pieces together and implement his system. But I think it has to be better than what we saw at the end of last year. And then, offensively, I think we kind of know what Kellen Moore brings. I mean, anybody that saw him as the OC in Dallas knows what kind of system he has. I think the Eagles offense, from the naked eye, from the fans watching tomorrow night, they didn't see anything in the preseason. No one does.
Right.
Unless you were at practice, you didn't see a lot of stuff, but it's a very different offense. I mean, you will, watching the game tomorrow night, you will see that right away. There's going to be a lot of shifting. There's going to be a lot of motion. There's going to be a lot of different formations. There's going to be a lot of stuff out there that's going to be a whole lot different than what you saw last year. And they certainly have the playmakers. What it's going to come down to ultimately is what it usually comes down to, and that's the quarterback play. If Jalen Hurts can regain the form of 2 years ago, then this team has a chance to be not just good, but a dynamic offensive team, given the players that they have. But the quarterback has to play better for them to be better.
Right. Ray, talking with Ray Didinger here from NBC Sports Philadelphia, and of course, a member of the NFL Hall of Fame. Ray, just talking about Nick Sirianni, I mean, he doesn't strike me as a hands-off type coach, but now he's got 2 veteran coordinators, and it seems like he's kind of being shoehorned into more of a not a caretaker, but a game manager or more of a CEO type. Do you think he's fit for that?
It's going to be different, and he's sort of acknowledged that he's got. I understand the principle that's at work here. What he's basically saying is, hey, I have 2 coordinators here that have done this before, been successful before, and really know what they're doing. And so I'm going to let them just coach, and I'm going to be the head coach. Yeah. And we'll see. I mean, it's a new role for him to be in that position. Yeah. And he's sort of indicated it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment from that standpoint. But I actually think it's kind of a good idea, Pat. I've seen a lot of coaches who have benefited by taking a step back. And if now this is all predicated on the fact that you have 2 coordinators who are really good at their jobs. Right. You have 2 coordinators who are really good at their jobs. If you have that, then there's no reason for the head coach to be meddling with what they're doing. Let them coach their guys, and you do the things that a head coach has to be concerned with that apply to the whole team in the course on a Sunday afternoon or a Monday night or whatever. Right. Because there's a lot. I've always thought, and in talking to guys who have coached in the league, they always talk about how even the experienced coaches, even the Coughlins and the Shulas and the Schottenheimers, and going back to the day, the Knowles, the guys that I talked to, would all acknowledge there's a lot of stuff's going on during the course of a game. Right. And if you get too caught up in trying to coach one side of the ball, you really can lose sight of the other side of the ball. Right. And there's a lot of stuff, instant decisions that have to be made about when to challenge a player, what not to challenge, how to use your timeouts, how to deal with the clock. There's a lot of that stuff that has to be has to be decided by. And if you're really caught up in running the one phase of the game, or you're worried about calling the next play, stuff like that can just escape you, even if you're a veteran coach. Right. And so I think that Nick's idea, I think it reflects the fact that he really believes in both Moore and Fangio. And I think he's right in doing that. And if that's the case, then he can take a step back and be a true head coach on game day. It'll be a different role for him. It will be. But if the 2 coordinators are as good as I think they're going to be, to me, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know, Ray. I mean, he doesn't strike me as that mold. Do I have this name right? Was it Jim Lee Howe, who was coach of the Giants when Vince Lombardi was his offensive coordinator and Tom Landry was the defensive coordinator? Right. Sirianni doesn't strike me as compared to, say, a Bill Parcells. He had Bill Belichick as a defensive coordinator, and he was down his throat almost seemingly every game. It'll be interesting to see how Sirianni evolves.
He had Parcells had Belichick running the defense, and he had Ron Earhart running the offense. Yeah,
so it'll be funny to see, but it'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up a great case with Jim Lee Howe in the old Giants of the 50s when he literally had Vince Lombardi was his offensive coordinator and Tom Landry was his defensive coordinator. And there's a famous story that Dave Anderson, great columnist of the New York Times, said that he was covering those Giant teams for the Brooklyn Eagle, which no longer exists, but he was covering the Giants then. He said they were playing at Yankee Stadium and they were practicing at Yankee Stadium. And he said Dave Anderson said he walked down the hallway where the coaches' offices were. And he walked by one office and Lombardi was in there drawing up the offense. And he walked by the next office and Landry was drawing up the defense. And he walked down to the next office and Jim Lee Howell was sitting with his feet on his desk reading the New York Times. Dave said, I swear that's true. And why not? I mean, why not? And listen, it worked. I mean, that Giants team, they got to the championship game pretty much every year. And those two guys both went, and both of those coaches, Landry and Lombardi, won championships and wound up in the Hall of Fame.
With different teams. The Giants somehow managed not to keep either one of them. And it set the Giants back. The 60s and 70s were two lost decades, really, for the Giants organization.
Yeah. And I don't know how many. I've said this when I was working at WIP before. I told the story, and people didn't know it. A lot of people didn't know it. I didn't even know it until I read David Moranis's book about the great book he wrote about Lombardi called When Pride Still Mattered. That Lombardi took the Eagles coaching job, accepted the Eagles coaching job in 1958. It was offered to him in 1958, and Lombardi accepted and said, I'll do it, and then went into Wellington Mara, who was running the team, and said, I just took the job. I just accepted the head coaching job with the Eagles. And Wellington Mara literally talked him out of it. Yeah. Said, you don't want to go there. It's a graveyard. You're going to go there. You're not going to win. And it's going to be the end of your, it's going to be the end of your coaching career. Wow. That's an absolute dead end for you. It's the wrong job. I understand you want to be a head coach. I understand that, but that is not a good job. And I tell you, stay here and wait, and a better job will come along. And so Lombardi agonized over it and then called the Eagles back and said, I hate to do this, and the Eagles hadn't announced anything. But Lombardi called them back and said, I've decided to stay in New York. Imagine how history might have changed if Lombardi had come to Philadelphia in 1958.
All right, listen, Ray Didinger, I want to do some rapid fire here with you.
Okay.
Just two quick segments I'd like to do. And I want to start with some NFC East talk and do a little stock up, stock down. You mentioned how the Eagles could go good to great. I agree with that. I think the Eagles are going to win that division. But let's talk about the other three teams. The Cowboys, again, a protracted and expanded and unresolved contract issues with their key players. They seem to do that almost every year, Ray. What's the stock up or stock down on Dallas going into 2024, in your opinion?
I would say about the same. I don't know that it's up or down. I see them as a team that will be a playoff team in all likelihood and get to the playoffs and probably implode the way they have done in recent years. I mean, I think they'll probably be, a 10 win team, maybe 11, good enough to get to the postseason. But I think in the postseason, the same thing's going to happen all over again. And I would expect that that'll be the end of Mike McCarthy.
Yeah, 30 years now. This is the 30th year, if it happens again, that the Cowboys will have failed to reach the NFC Championship game. The New York Giants, we just were reminiscing about them and the catastrophic coaching decisions they made. I am not big on the Giants, Ray. Give me your thoughts on them. Stock up, stock down.
Probably down. I just don't see where they got any better, and I think they lost Saquon Barkley, I think he's going to have a real impact here in Philadelphia. I think he's going to come here and play very well. Right. They haven't really replaced him. They're putting a lot of stock in Daniel Jones. This will be his year. I mean, how many years have you said that? I just don't see it happening. No. the one bright light for them, if indeed there is one, is I think this kid Neighbors that they drafted the first round, the wide receiver, is a good, really good player. Really, really good player. I mean, he will be the best receiver that Jones has had to throw to up to this point. Will that be enough to make them a playoff team? I don't think so.
Yeah. All right. And then the last team is the Washington Commanders. I mentioned earlier in this show, Ray, that I think it's a good year and that a lot of historical doormats are getting off the mat. The Bears, I think, are going to be competitive this year. The Falcons, I think, will be. The Jets, if Aaron Rodgers stays upright. The Commanders have been seemingly in the woods for years. Stock up or stock down on them in 2024?
I would say stop pointing up, but probably not this year. You know, I think they have a chance with this quarterback, with the kid they drafted, who I think has a chance to be really good. I don't know how good he's going to be this year as a rookie playing with a team that still has a lot of issues. But I think that they finally have a guy that they can build around and win with. But we're talking, in that case, a couple years down the road. You're talking about this year. I suspect it's probably going to be another struggling kind of year. I would be surprised. I actually would be surprised if they even made it to 8 wins. I think I see them as like a 6 or 7 win team, very similar to where I see the Giants.
All right. And then the last thing I wanted to do with you, Ray, was I'm always interested in windows closing and looking at teams going into the season that I think they're facing basically a make or break year. Is this the last really good chance that a team's going to have to get deep into January? Let me hit you with a few teams and you tell me if I'm right. Buffalo. I mean, the Bills, I think, have not done a good job of surrounding their quarterback with Josh Allen with really, really good talent. And I think the window is closing on Buffalo. Agree or not?
Yeah, I do. I think they have, as long as they've got Josh Allen, they've got a chance. I mean, I think he is that good. I don't know about how you feel, Pat. I mean, I'm a little bit surprised when he came out of school, when he came out of Wyoming. I wasn't sure he was going to be that good an NFL quarterback. You know, to me, he just wasn't an accurate enough passer. Yeah. But to his credit, he worked at it, and he's made himself into a very, very good quarterback. I think one of the best. As long as they have him, I think they'll have a chance. But I think the defense has taken a step back. And the window closing, I think they probably have another year, maybe this year. But beyond that, I think they better do it this year, because I think beyond that, it's going to be difficult.
I think the San Francisco 49ers, Ray, are heading for cap hell. They're a talented team. They got a lot of talent, but they got some guys that are coming up on contract years that they might lose. Is this the last year for this iteration of the 49ers to maybe finally get over the hump for Kyle Shanahan?
Yeah, I think that right now I would probably still make them the favorite in the NFC. But I know what you're saying is that contractually they're going to have some really tough decisions to make, including how much are they willing to invest in Brock Purdy? Right. You know, I mean, look, he's won a lot of games and he's played himself into a stature I don't think any of us really foresaw. But now he's going to want to get paid by one of the elite guys. Well, how far are you going to go with that? The one thing they have going for them is John Lynch is a really good general manager. I mean, for a guy who was a Hall of Fame player and was a broadcaster and got snatched out of the broadcast booth and handed this job, there were a lot of people that said, what are they doing? You know, what are his qualifications to be in that job? But what we found out is that John Lynch is a very, very smart guy, and he's done a really good job running that team. I think he's got a lot of challenges after this year. I agree with you. But I think Lynch is a smart enough and agile enough thinker that he'll figure it out.
All right. And the last team, Ray, I wanted to run by you is the Ravens. I always laugh about the Ravens, and I talked about it earlier in the show that I think they're a real good live dog against Kansas City, because Kansas City likes to win games in January, and Baltimore loves to win games in September and October. But the Ravens have just been doing this. They stockpile talent. They're a very good team, well-coached team. I love John Harbaugh, but they just don't get it done in January. mainly because of number 15 on Kansas City. But is there a window closing on the Ravens in terms of their ability to get finally to get to a Super Bowl again?
I don't know. I guess it depends on how you feel about Derrick Henry. I mean, how much does he bring to that offense? I mean, Lamar Jackson clearly is still the key to it, but Henry gives them something that they haven't had before. The thing that would concern me as a Ravens fan is they've got a lot of change on the offensive line. I think they got 3 new starters in the offensive line, which to me is problematic. I would say I would probably still make them the favorite in that division. And as long as they have Lamar Jackson, I think you have to continue to mention them in that group of teams that have a chance.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot depends on how much Henry has left. If Henry can still has a lot of game left in him, then he can transform that offense into a better offense than we've seen up to this point. I just don't know right now how much he's got left. But I'm kind of in the mode of as long as Jackson is there and playing at an MVP level, they'll always have a chance.
I think the signing of Henry, though, Ray, was an indication that the Ravens are all in this year. I don't think you can realistically think Derrick Henry's just going to keep going year after year the way he runs the ball. I think this year is their shot, and I think they're taking it. I think they can go deep, but I think this year is it for them. I think they're going to have to rethink this if they don't get there.
Well, I think, I agree with that. I think that there is a feeling that they're kind of going for it this year. But I think the challenge is going to be how are you going to integrate Jackson and Henry in the same offense? Yeah. It really, the offense really runs through Jackson. And Henry gives you another weapon that you hadn't had before. But the guy who makes that thing go is still Jackson. And he's still got to be the key guy there. But you said a minute ago, and I agree with you, I have always been a big John Harbaugh fan. I mean, going back to his days as special teams coach here in Philadelphia, I mean, I always thought that he was a guy that would, given the opportunity, would be a good head coach. And boy, he certainly has become that. And, it's a little bit of a different team with some changes that have to be made. But it seems to me that John Harbaugh is a guy that always figures it out.
All right. I do. I mean, that is true. What a great hire he has been for the Ravens. One of the great NFL coach. All right, Ray, I took up a ton of your time here. I appreciate the conversation. I guarantee you over the rest of this weekend, opening weekend, you won't say the name Jim Lee Hall again. Only on this show do we manage to get him into the discussion. But I appreciate you taking the time. I always love the discussion. I look forward to having you back. All right.
It's always a pleasure, Pat. It's always a pleasure visiting with you, and look forward to talking to you again as the season goes on.
All right, Ray. Thank you very much. The great Ray Didinger there, the Hall of Famer, joining me, and that'll do it. I've kept Xander way over time. I hope you enjoyed the opening show. It was great. I want to thank all my guests, Ray Didinger, Sal Paolantonio, Bill Reinhardt, Justin Mark, for joining me, and